Hey everybody, my name is Matthew Gibson and welcome back to another Fusion 360 video. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different where instead of showing you different mechanics of Fusion, we're actually going to apply them and construct a shape from something in real life. I'll even attempt to 3D print it and take it off the build plate to show you guys in one of the later videos. Probably the next one. So, I was looking around my room for a couple different shapes or something that would work well, and I didn't want to do anything too basic like just a little cube speaker or a roll of tape, so I decided to settle on something with a good culmination of concepts, and what I picked was my little soap bar container. So I haven't used this in a little while because I started using body wash instead of regular soap, but that's not important. What's important is that there are multiple places here where we can use different methods that I've talked about so far, and a few that I haven't, where we can actually approach and create this full shape. And so if you direct your attention to my Fusion layout, I've actually attempted this and completed it before. And so you can see, I can get you a better view on this, that along the top and the sides they have the very smooth, what looks like little hemispheres cut out of it, and a smaller frame on the top, completely encapsulated by the bottom, and very round edges. And you can even see that I've managed to create or replicate the four indents on the top. And so what I'm going to be doing is just running through the same process that I did for this today. And I'm just going to be explaining myself the whole time and why I'm doing the things I'm doing, so that you can follow along and hopefully be able to start making things of your own, just like this. So first things first. When replicating a real-life object, you have to first decide whether you want to try 3D printing it or not. And because I want to 3D print this, I need to take careful consideration of my units. And because the ruler I used was in centimeters, and that's unusual for Fusion because Fusion is by default set to millimeters. So if I tried to 3D print this and throw the mesh into the printer, it's going to print something about 1/100th of the size of this. So unless I went into the specific build plate later and scaled it up by 100 times, but that leaves a chance for the file to get corrupted or to scale out and to look blurry or whatever. So the best thing you can do for yourself is before you start attempting a project is know what units you want to use. Then you're going to go up here to your name, beautiful name, and you're going to take preferences, and here it's going to pop up a bunch of white text menus. And all you're going to do is going to go down to default units and design. And what you're going to do is, because in here you can set the default units used in new documents. So this is before you start a new document. And because mine was set to millimeters before, I want it in centimeters. You would hit apply and then OK. And now if I start a new document, my units are going to be in centimeters. And I can actually prove that by going back into preferences and hitting design, and there it is, centimeters. Okay. And so first things first, in terms of a strategic approach to creating this soap container, I'm not going to do the hollow part because that's a bit tricky to do today with the spikes here and then different contours and whatnot. So what I'm just going to be doing is treating it as one complete shape like this, and I'm going to show you how I got there. But first steps for me was generally thinking about a base where you want to start from one plane to make one big shape to get most of your work out of the way. And essentially what you want to do, or a good strategy, is to always do largest to smallest. Essentially do the piece that is the largest part of your model if you can first. Generally it works out. In some cases there are exceptions. But in our case here, it works out very nicely. So what I'm going to do, or what you would do with your model, and specifically for this one, is I would first notice that there are two separate labels here. Essentially, there's a cover that goes all the way around, and a smaller bit here on the bottom piece. And now, a Fusion intermediate like myself would notice that I could easily draw these using rectangles, but the way I would create them through extrusion is I would start with a rectangle the size of the large cap and extrude it up to where the this line is here, where the large part ends, and then I would draw on that surface this rectangle and extrude it up the rest of the way, so that I have a model, because again it's only one piece, so I don't actually need to separate the two, but so that I have the whole shape quickly and easily set up together. So we'll start with the extrusion just for now. And so I'm gonna, first things first, I'm gonna measure out the large part of my soap container here. And we see in centimeters it is 11.1 centimeters. So first things first, obviously, you go back to your sketch format here, and because I know the dimensions of both of the length and the width here, and I'm not approximating, it's very easy for me to use the center rectangle, because this allows me to just, doesn't really matter where I start my design. Let's start it up here, and I'm gonna drag my screen over, click, and then you see how it just kind of gives me the option for two separate length and width here. And so I'm going to keep the orientation this way, at least for the reference here. And so this length, the long length that's referenced here, is 9 right now. Again, was 11.1. And so all I have to do is type in 11.1 and hit tab, and it's already in centimeters, so we know we're starting off on the right foot. And then now it's asking for the width. I measure that out, and because I've measured it before, I already know the numbers, but I'm doing this again anyway. Is the long bit 8.2. And there's the larger base, this part of the rectangle. And so now what I'm going to do is, again, extrude up to this line here. And you do that with just the simple create tool and extruding like we said, but we need to figure out the height of this said piece. So we take our trusty ruler, and we measure it out to be 3.1 centimeters. And voila. But obviously we're not done with our extrusion yet, and we need to do a bit more drawing. So we're going to go, and you can either right click on here and draw directly on the plane, or I'm going to incorporate another thing we talked about and do an offset plane, even though it's not really an offset plane because I'll be using it at 0 centimeters away. And so here we are, and then right click on the plane, create sketch, and now I'm going to want to go up the rest of the distance. And the rest of the distance is, turn this around, I just eyeballing it. It's not extremely precise, it's just an example. Is 1.7. And so, or, oops, I got ahead of myself. What I need to do is first redefine a new rectangle that I'm going to extrude to 1.7. And that rectangle, first things first, something to notice is that as this rectangle is perfectly inset inside this rectangle, what you can actually do is apply a certain constraint. And what I mean by constraint is this whole topic that we haven't really talked too much about yet, because there's a lot to go over, and it's best if you see it in action to really understand how powerful it is. And so here's our first chance to do just that. And so I'm going to go back into rectangles here and center point rectangle. And now, depending on what you know about your shape or your design or whatever you're trying to do, you can actually use essentially little like shortcuts to get the thing you want to where you want it to be. Excuse me. And so what I know is that the center of this rectangle is the same as the center of this rectangle, because it's an equal size, or they're both parallel. They don't cross over each other, and they're the same size throughout, uniform. So what I can do is, and looking at my palette on the right, hopefully I move my face, and you can see different constraints. You have coincident, collinear, concentric, midpoint, unfixed, fixed, parallel, perpendicular, horizontal, all this stuff. And those have a lot more to do with lines, but essentially by constraints, it also looks at the snap functions here. And the way the snap function works is it relies on constraints to do what it wants to do. And so I have snap enabled, and you see the little blue box that follows my cursor around? Well, when I get it to a corner, you see how if I move my mouse a little bit, it doesn't move? And that's because it's assuming it wants me on that tiny little grid space here. And it does the same around here. So if you're just approximating, generally it tries to give you something to latch onto. But for me, I know that I need the center of this rectangle because I picked center point rectangle. It needs to be at the same center point as this one. And it even tells me place center point here. And so I can click here, and I know that both the centers of the rectangles are lined up. And so now all I have to do now is remeasure the width to be 7.6 and remeasure, I did that wrong. This is what you need to be careful of. It's tab and not enter that gets you the new rectangle. And so we're going to go back into here, center point rectangle. We're going to go back out. And 7.6 is correct, but we're going to hit tab and move ourselves to our next unit before we lock it in. And our next unit is 10.5. And now hit enter to lock it in. And it's a little interesting because we had two different sized rectangles that we ended up with different, essentially, construction lines that it gives us when you draw a rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and delete, as in just click to highlight and delete the old sketch lines. Or just kidding. These are the old sketch lines. Perfect. Okay. So now we have our new construction lines. A construction line in 3D printing or in 3D design terms is just a line that you use to help orient yourself, like this. So for example, if you knew precisely where you wanted something and you want to snap to it, because you don't know the dimensions, which we'll do later with things like these, you use construction lines. Lines that don't show up on your design, but are there when to help you essentially orient and place things. And so what I'm going to do now is do the final extrusion. And first things first, I believe I said 1.7, but I'm just going to double check. Yes, 1.7. And so 1.7. And boom. Now we have the initial kind of form down, where we have two rectangles breaking out into another rectangle. And so, and I remember mentioning earlier that there are a few things that we're going to go over today that we haven't gone over before. And that those two things are going to be fillets and holes. And what I mean by holes, obviously, is just drilling a hole. Piercing a hole into the model and cleaning it out so that it's empty space. And so if we look at our little model here, we'll notice that on all of the sides, they have a equal little, almost like hemisphere carved out of the shape here. And so with careful analysis and measurement, I've figured out that the circle, or the hemisphere, is, 1 centimeter in height and 2 centimeters in width. And that just means that you have a circle of diameter 2 that's only half onto here. It cuts out the 1 diameter for half the, or the 1 is the radius because it's half the diameter. And so I'm going to go ahead and actually go into my create again, but instead of new component or extrude, I just scroll down to hole here, and you can see how it starts me off at a plane if I want to pick a random spot. But because I have snap functions on, you see as I highlight this rectangle here, these triangles, these are the midpoints along these lines here. Same thing with this. These are the corners. So I have a couple different, or at least I have the midpoints of lines ready to be snapped onto. And because I know and I measured that these are at the exact midpoint of these lines and these lines, I can go ahead and just click right here, because what I want to do is delete only this layer here. You can see a little bit, at least, that the hole doesn't pierce the bottom part, this bit here, but it only takes care of the top shell. And so what we're going to do is we're going to click here. And now he's following the arrow. It knows what direction it wants to cut. It just doesn't know how far. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is first click on my arrow here to get myself into the distancing. And just like with the extruding to a face, I can click here and it'll actually, that little red line is the hole that it's going to cut. But remember, I said that it's going to be a hole of diameter 2, and so this here can't be 0.2 centimeters, it needs to be 2 centimeters. And now you can actually see the hole cutting away this part here, a little bit of a preview of what's going on. And it's only 0.3 centimeters in because it's a very thin top shell. So we go ahead and hit enter, and look at that. A nice clean cut. It doesn't quite look the same, but we'll get there. Yeah, we'll get there later. And yeah. So what we need to do next is redo that cut around the whole thing. And so a little hotkey I like to use is H, brings me right back into the whole menu. And because I know that this width is equal to this width here, I can actually click on the same spot. It brings me to the same hole I just cut, and it's very convenient that way, because instead of defaulting you back to an original dimensions, because everyone's dimensions are different, they let you set up one the first time, and that's what you can repeat as you reference the same tool over and over again. And so all I have to do is hit enter again to send the command in. I hit H to go back into hole. I go back into here, and now something worth checking is to make sure that this is the same as this, because I'm not sure if it is here. And so what I'll do again is I'll grab the arrow and then I'll click the face, and it is the same. And so perfect. I can just click here and then H again. Oop, misclicked. I accidentally clicked there. You can hit Control Z to get out of it, or you can hit escape if you don't want to send it in. Same thing. You need to be careful about which triangle you click, actually. Let me show you why real quick. Because there's a bunch of triangles right here, so if you're not careful with your mouse or your orientation, you'll click here, and then your hole will show up there. Or it'll show up on a different face coming the wrong way, or whatever. So you just need to be very careful about camera control and where you're actually working and what face you're actually working on. So we want to be cutting in from the side this way. And the way to do that is with that button, or with that midpoint there. We hit enter again. And the hole works because, or at least the snap function works, I forgot to mention this, is because where you click is where the center of the circle for the hole starts. And so we know that the center of the circle is right on top of the midpoint here. And so that's how we were easily able to approximate, okay, I can click here, click here, click here, and it would just snap together for me. And so that's a very important part of fiddling with Fusion, because the more you fiddle with it, the more you'll learn about the snap functions and the different ways that you can not manipulate, but kind of like find shortcuts through the system to make a model like this fairly quickly. And so now, the only other thing we have to do before we get into fillets is make the little divots at the top. And the way we're going to do that is the same way as we did this. We're going to cut slightly into this, because remember, the whole extrusion is solid. I didn't make it hollow like this actually is in real life. I'm treating this as one shape again. And so what we're going to do here is, no, wrong one. First things first. We're going to create a sketch right on this here, because the shapes are completely enveloped in that rectangle, and they start at the surface of that rectangle. I can sketch right on top of it and where I need to be. And so what I'm going to do here is just sketch a regular line. But looking at the size and the dimensions of where these are on this face, all I have to do is measure it out and use the lines as like a little step ladder to get to where I need to go. And so measuring from the top, and I plan on, another thing I plan on doing, and the reason this works so well is because the midpoint rectangle hotkey. So as I'm sitting here, I know that I want to use the midpoint hotkey to create my rectangle, because if I can figure out where the midpoint of these little spheres are, or not spheres, these little indents are, in relative to here, all I have to do is draw a line over, and because of the snap function, I can take the center point of that rectangle and snap it right to the midpoint, or to the end point of that line, and my rectangle's in the right spot. And then all I have to do after that is dimension it and draw out the last midpoints, and I'm good to go, and get on into filleting. And so, from the top left, I'm measuring the top left indentation right now. From the top, the midpoint is just about 2.5 centimeters. and from the left, as referencing the Fusion workspace here, is just about 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the first point of my line, and just like sketching before, it's just about, what did I say it was, 2.5 centimeters down. I'm going to hit enter here. I'm going to hit another hotkey that you'll learn and know to come and love, L, and see how it lets me snap onto the endpoint of this line. I'm going to click there again, and as I start to scroll out, you can do it in any direction you want, but if you're close enough to the to flat, it'll snap you onto the flat axis. Very convenient for block designs like this. And we know that it's 3 from the side, and I hit enter. And there's the midpoint of this rectangle, and that's very, very convenient for me to use. And so all I need to do now is just understand that from the center of this left one to the one on the right is just about, it looks to be 4.4 centimeters. So I draw another line, and because I know they're equal height, I can do, well, I got pretty close there, 4.4. And bring it out to the center. And now it does omit the endpoint here because it thinks you drew a line together and together. It doesn't want to break it up with an endpoint. I'm not sure how to enable this to show up, but it appears here if you were to hover it, or if you try to use it to snap to, which I will. It will show up. And so now, all we need now is the distances between the midpoints of these and the midpoints of these, and that'll get me the location of the other ones. And they're just about 3 apart as well, both of them. So I'm going to go back into line, I'm going to click here, and I'm going to go down 3. I'm going to do the same thing again on this side. And if you don't know the length of something and you want it to be equal to something else without having to type it in, what you can do is if you go ahead and hover this point, this snap point, right, it will give you a line so that in whatever direction you end at the same objective length from that location horizontally. And so I can use this to go across anywhere I want. But because I've hovered it, it allows me to go ahead. And if you can see, I can't really move my mouse to it. But if you see right above, at the if you go above 3 centimeters where I started this line, you'll see the little perpendicular symbol, showing that it's ready to, if I clicked here, it would snap it to be equal length and perpendicular to that previous line, which would make it parallel. And boom, I hit escape to leave. And there we are. And I know it looks a little funky, but sometimes this will save you a lot of time than trying to figure out, okay, where's the relationship of this to this, and starting it at coordinate axes or points or something like that. And so what we can do now is go back and do our rectangles, center rectangle, and we can click right here. And now it's up to us to figure out the dimensions of these boxes fully. And it looks like lengthwise they're 3.3 and height-wise they're 1.9. So I'm going to click here, and it's going to make me do length first, 3.3, tab, 1.9, enter. And there we are. And we're going to do the same thing over and over again. Sometimes you just got to, hunker down and be able to chug through a lot of work. There's not always a shortcut for everything. But something else to note, if I don't want to type in numbers over and over again, I hover this point here, and look what it does. It kind of constricts my model to be exactly 1.9 high, which is what I want it to be. So I can just immediately hit tab and move to the next dimension, 3.3. And now I have 2 identical rectangles. And I can do the same thing with, not create, another rectangle. Down here, I get this line, the 3.3 is perfect. All I have to do is type 1.9, perfect. And we sketch another one, starting here. Almost had it, 3.3. Perfect. Now, and again as before, because these lines aren't construction lines, I just used regular lines for convenience, it's going to cut the shape into pieces. So now I can go back into the sketch, find these lines, highlight them and delete them, and just be left with the rectangles. I'm going to delete the dimensions to make it a little less cluttery. When you punch in the dimension for something because of how long you want it to be, it automatically dimensions it for you. And boom, there are my lines, or there are my rectangles. And so, if you're wondering how to cut something, it's actually pretty easy. So, instead of extruding, when you click on extrude here, it actually doesn't force you to extrude, but you can't extrude into something, you can cut into something. And the way you do that is you hop over to the extrude page here, and instead of doing operation make a new body, there's cut. And so what I want to do is essentially make an indent, which is about 0.2 centimeters into the thing here. You can see the light catching on it from the window. It's about 0.2 centimeters. And so if I type 0.2 and I reorient the direction to be downward, 0.2. Nope, I want to do it this way. Remember, you have to punch in a negative for opposite directions and stuff like that. And if I hit enter, boom, there are my cuts into the design here. And so now what I need to do is go around, and this looks very similar to this and stuff, right? But what I need to do is go ahead and round off some of these edges. And with filleting, it takes a little bit getting used to, but it's not that difficult to get down. And so what I would start with is probably the biggest piece here, because we started this, and this is why we started it as one rectangle in this case, because it's a lot easier to just fill it instead of having multiple inset faces to fill it. And you'll see what I mean once you try maybe this shape or something else on your own. But first we select the face, or we don't even have to select it first. What we can do is we can go into create, or no, we can go into modify, excuse me, and press fillet. And you see how in the little diagram here, it just makes the edges round. That's what it does. And so we click into fillet, we click on our whatever shape we want to round, and we know that's the one we want to round because the edges of these here are curved around the sides like that. So here we are. We want to select that top shape because it moves seamlessly, almost seamlessly into a round thing. And generally, it's very hard to measure the, like at least with a ruler, the radius of curvature. And so generally your instructor or your boss or something will give you the radius it needs to be or the correct tools in order to find it. Just the radius of curvature is just how steep, essentially how big is the circle at which you're drawing the thing on. And so I can kind of approximate it, but essentially what I did for the bigger ones, I used 0.5 as my 0.5 centimeters as my or my dimension. I hit enter and boom. And now it doesn't quite look the same because notice that these are rounded as well. But the top looks just about right because you have a flat top that kind of, when it glistens in the light there, you can kind of see it. Hold on, let's get it to go down. Spatial awareness needs help. There we go. You can see how it kind of is extremely flat at the top and immediately starts to weigh down. But then again, it doesn't have these lines here on the sides. So that's our next step. We hit fillet again, and you can click on as many lines as you want. You don't have to hold shift or anything, and it'll record all of them in blue for you. And so what I'm going to do is 0.5 again. And now it has corners. And see, these lines here won't come up in the print. That won't show up. This will all be one seamless edge. This is just showing me that, okay, I kind of have a cylinder here if I wanted to work with it. I have a corner here of a sphere if I wanted to work with it. I have a rectangle if I wanted to work with it. All that stuff. Alright, and so now we're done with the top side. We can move on to the holes on the side. And I know that probably right at the beginning we noticed that these ones here are a little bit sharper than the ones on the circle here. And so a common mistake people make is filleting the wrong thing, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So when you look at this and you go, oh, I probably just want to fillet the line here, you know, these lines to make it, like this line here and here, to make it round out, and I'll show you why that's wrong in a second. But first things first, I'm going to go back into fillet, and I'll click the lines for you. And let's say we did it at 0.4. Or not at 4, 0.4. That doesn't look right. The ones here are on a sharp edge. So this one, what it did was because we picked the edge on the outside, the one I'm highlighting right here, because we picked that edge here, it rounded off that edge, not the inside edge here, the one with this surface here. It's very difficult to see when I do it like that. This edge here. And so we can control Z our way out of there, and it is tricky, I can promise you that, but all you need to remember is that you go back into fillet, and it's not this line, it is this one. Oh, not this one. It is this, no, see? Emphasis on clicking and being able to put your mouse where you want to put it is very important. This line and this line. Or because I rotated my camera, I lost the fillet. There and there. And so let's say we put that at 0.5 as well. And there we are. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? Alright, and so what we're going to do is we're just going to go around and repeat the same thing for the rest of the shape here. Because remember, you can do them all at once. And there we are. All with that nice smooth edge. And so now, looking at this, you would say we're almost done, but the only thing we have left is there's a tiny little fillet on the inside of those things there. You see how it's round and not sharp in there? And so these are more the finer detail things. And this is what I mean by going from bigger to smaller. We started with the big extrusion, did the next biggest extrusion that we had, then we started to cut away. It's a lot easier to extrude a cube and then cut a hole in it instead of drawing a cube without a hole and extruding it the way you want to, just from personal experience. So, what we can do now is this. Oh, I didn't hit enter. Whoops. Another thing to keep in mind is that pay attention to what you're doing, otherwise you might not get all your work done. And then, yeah, we'll just quickly re-highlight these. 0.5, perfect. And so now, again, what we need to do is go into these shapes and make them rounded. And so what we can try doing is going like we did on the top side. Well, all the edges are rounded. Why don't we just try clicking on this shape here? Worth a try. So let's go back into fillet here. And because this is what seems to be a weaker rounding angle than that, we'll do 0.2. And you're like, hey, that looks pretty good. And it does. So another way to do that, whoops, man, I keep messing this up. It's 0.2, enter. Alright, and then we'll keep it for comparison with another one. And so instead of this plane, what you can try and do, if you want to, is do it by edge, because then it'll know which ones to round off. And if you do it again at 0.2, you get the same thing. So that's kind of a running joke in Fusion, that you can do a lot of the same stuff, just different ways. And so clicking on the whole shape here was obviously a lot faster than clicking on all four, even though the time difference wasn't that big. But that's just true for a lot of cases where you have a project and you want to be able to complete what you need to complete. But in order to do that, you need to be able to know the shortcuts and know what's going to be the fastest and all that. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is escape out, fillet both of these to be 0.2 as well to match it up. And so that looks pretty good, but we notice, and some of the quick ones about you, that go into good memory to know what this looks like, is that on the edges here, there is no line. There's no edge like we see right here. That line there, let me zoom in a little bit. That line there does not exist. So we need to do an extra fillet to smooth that away. And so you can try doing the tops, but again, that's just like the outside edge here. That won't work because it's just you're smoothing the wrong face. And so what we'll do now is we'll go back in and we'll make sure to be clicking these very tiny lines. And this is where knowing how to use the camera is very important, because if you misclick on a piece like that and you want to deselect it, all you have to do is re-click it. But being able to see well is a very important part of what you do. And so once you finish highlighting all of these, you can punch in the 0.2, and there it is. Ooh, round it off. Perfect. And now, I missed it before, but the only thing we have left is the bottom corners here, because the bottom corners of these, as I rotate it around, are not sharp like these are. They're rounded just like the top is. And so we'll do it the same way. We're not going to click here because it would round the edges on the top, and we're not going to click here because it would round these edges as well. We don't want that. So in this case, it's a lot better to specifically click the edge. You can't get away with just clicking on the face. And we'll do that at 0.5 as well. And voila. We have our Dove soap container with all the right edges. And oh, actually, one thing left. This corner here doesn't exist. It's rounded off. And so what we'll need to do is click on here, or we'll go back to fillet and click on all of these. I was so proud of myself there for a second. And there we are. I believe that is the correct. That's a little, there we are, a little side-by-side comparison. Let me turn it the way that you guys see it. There we go. And voila. That is how you not only look ahead through your project, figure out the units you want, and make sure your build plate is set to those units, especially if you want to export it as a mesh. And from there, what you need to do is make sure that you do large to small. And I can't emphasize that enough. The proper planning will make any project go a lot faster than improper planning. Because, and you saw it through the way I did it, is that the way I did it was I started with the biggest piece, I extruded a smaller piece on top, and then I went to work with the fillets. And if I had started with fillets before, I wouldn't have had the midpoint to snap onto, or I wouldn't have had the easy access to drawing a line like I had at the beginning. And so just making sure that you get the bigger stuff out of the way, and then getting the smaller stuff out of the way secondly is very, very important. And so as I do my outro, I'm going to go ahead and fix another mistake I found. And yeah, this has been Fusion 360, a live or a real-life object creation by Matthew Gibson. And next video, I'm going to show you how to export this. And once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and print this for you and compare it to the real thing, see how it holds up. And so yeah, thanks for tuning in. My name is Matthew Gibson, and have fun out there.